Well, let's see how this is going to go. It's a little delayed. I don't like that. Let's see. Yeah, I really don't like the delay. Kind of freaks me out. All right. Delays are good though. Okay. I am Robert Taylor, and I stream very infrequently. This is very rare for me to do. So this may be a bit awkward. But I've been meaning to record a session and publish it. I just haven't had the opportunity. So I'm going to do this live and see how that goes. I have a podcast that I call Ecclesiastical Matters, where I discuss my experiences, my thoughts regarding a group that I had been a part of for several decades called the Local Church or the Lord's Recovery. They have a headquarters that's a publishing company called Living Stream Ministry. In order to be a proper local church, you have to be in line with the one ministry and the one publishing work. Otherwise, you're not really a local church, which is quite an interesting concept. But that's neither here nor there. It is a religious group, fundamentalist Christians, evangelical in a lot of ways. But they normally stand outside of society in a sense that some separation, some not of the world type. There's long history of how they are different than society. And some of that is in regards to not being a denomination, not being part of denominations, not in getting involved in that type of realm. And sometimes they're, not political. That's been talked about before, that they're above politics. They're not about politics. They're about bringing Jesus back. And they are dispensationalist. They do hearken their lineage back to John Nelson Darby, who you may have heard of if you're paying attention to a lot of the talk about the rapture. There was a lot of talk about the rapture last year, and there's now talk about the rapture again this year, coming up in a week. March 22nd is the latest date I've heard in social media. There's always a date. There's always a claim that there's something. And that's not this group. This group is not saying that March 22nd there will be a rapture. But you may have heard that, and you may have done a little bit of research, or you may have seen one of my videos where I talk about John Nelson Darby and the history of dispensationalism and the rapture. And this group is dispensationalist. That's one of the things they do. Mainly, when I talk about this group, what I talk about is that I really don't have disagreements with the group, doctrinally speaking. I'm not here to say that their position on dispensationalism is wrong. I'm here to say that they are dispensationalists. But I'll also point out that I have not heard that they're saying any dates in particular. They're not saying that, it's going to be on a certain date that something's going to happen and you need to sell everything and give all your money to the ministry or you won't make the rapture. Nothing like that. I've never heard anything like that from this group. I've heard, talk amongst the members where we would talk about, well, what could the signs of the times be and what could it look like? I've heard that. But as far as the official position, it's not into that realm. It's not a Harold Camping type group. It's not a Jehovah's Witness type group in that sense, where the Jehovah's Witnesses had a history of predicting when the Lord would come back. And eventually they just said, you know what, it happened. It was just spiritual, right? So they don't do that. They do talk about dispensationalism. That is something big. So there is a connection there. One of the reasons that I wanted to go ahead and stream this is because several things have kind of piled up in my inbox from some of the videos that I've done over the past year or so. And when I started doing videos, I really didn't have the intention of making videos about the local church. That wasn't really my goal. There's another creator on YouTube who's has her own channel called Inconvenient Ruth, Ruth Wise. Ruth and her husband Donnie, I've known them for over a decade, 2 decades now, actually. I don't have a lot of contact with them, but I do notice when there's publishing and their names are involved, right? So I see that. So I saw Ruth's channel pop up on YouTube, and it's a very personal story that she tells of her own experiences, very, very personal, but it involves the history of the group that I also was a member in. Some of her testimony is her own. I don't know personally the things that she has gone through because they happened out of sight, and that's one of the problems that's brought up with this group a lot. There's a lot of things that happen out of sight, and then things that do happen stay out of sight. They're not actually brought up into the light. But that said, there's a number of things she talks about that I can confirm that were public. I have not heard her say something that happened publicly that I can say, no, that doesn't sound accurate. So when it comes to what she has said that I have personal experience with or have seen documentation considering, it's all legit, which leads me to believe that the things she talks about on a personal level are probably also legit. I'm going to believe her and her experience just by the fact that she's standing up and saying something in a way that doesn't benefit her in the least to talk about the things that she talks about. So just over a year ago, I had stumbled across her channel and I watched some, and then I read the comments, and she was getting abused in the comments by active members of the Lord's Recovery, the local church, which is a common pattern, because if you say anything that disparages or appears to disparage, even if you're a faithful member, but you have a concern and you state that concern, you're considered an enemy. You are negative, poisonous, death, all of these things. Just by saying something that could be considered disparaging. You're not even trying to disparage. It's just considered disparaging. All of a sudden, you are one with the enemy. That's a really scary thing. And if you are familiar with high control, high demand groups, things that fit Stephen Hassan's The Bite model for abusive groups, that's up there. That's in that realm, right? I've used the word cult with them. It's a hard word. It means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. You know, you have cult that could be just any group that has its own subculture. You know, I mean, that almost everything is a cult. That's a society in that sense, right? So it's a very benign term. But most people, when they hear cult, they think of Jim Jones and the People's Temple, or Waco, the Branch Davidians, where people are physically harmed and get in trouble with the law. And I'm not saying that. I'm not going that direction. But if you talk about a group that practices high levels of control and sets anyone who's not in the group as against the group, that's an unhealthy thing. And I would say, yeah, it's a high demand, high control group. Just, it is. So people took issue with some of my comments, but when I saw how she was being treated, I went ahead and I said, I got to do something. So I just jumped on and made a couple of videos to expose some of the comments as being inaccurate and stretching the truth, and just basically standing up for Ruth and saying, you know, the thing she's talking about is real. And by the way, you guys are weird. And then it kind of went on, and I started thinking more about what did I want to say. And it came up to about 3 things. One was the matter of not being honest about being a high control, high demand group. If you say that to somebody, they'll say, no, we're not a high demand. We just love the Lord. We just love the Lord. Oh, yeah, but you love the Lord in a way that you need to follow a certain pattern. And it has to do with what books are on your shelf. The books on my shelf right here are all technical. This is my office that I do work in. But, if your bookshelf has religious books or faith books, spiritual books that are, let's say, not published by Living Stream Ministry, you might kind of get a little bit of a, are you doing research? Why do you have that? Is it an heirloom that you're saving for some event to sell, make a lot of money? What is that? Is this something that you're critiquing and you're going to submit a submission to Affirmation and Critique, the journal that purports to be scholarly, probably is, and critiques Christianity and cultural events in light of Living Stream Ministry publications? Maybe you're going to do that. What, you're just going to enjoy and read it? Why would you do that? We have the ministry of Watchman Nee and Witness Lee, and that's all you need, right? So there is that level of control, and that's one of the things that I brought up, because people would say, no, we allow other books. Look, we have Andrew Murray, we have Father Finlan, we have Madame Guyon, we have T. Austin Sparks. And it's like, yeah, you have those because Witness Lee said it was okay, and he quoted them, and he recommended one of Andrew Murray's books called The Spirit of Christ. Anyway, it's a book that is in line with one of Witness Lee's doctrines. And so he likes that book. And so he republished it or recommended it, and it ended up on everyone's bookshelf. So when people say, oh, no, we do accept other publishers and other publications and other authors, they go back to these books that are explicitly okayed by the ministry. It's not that if you find a book in the bookstore, say by Max Lucado, first name I could think of, they're going to say, oh, cool, you're reading something. Does it help you love the Lord? Does it help you experience God? Does it help you in your faith? Does it help you in your daily life? Are you enjoying that? Is that something that you're finding comfort in? No. The question is, why are you reading that? It's a mixture. Don't do that. Just read the ministry. Just read more life studies. You know what? Go read Max Lucado after you finish the life study of Romans. Have you finished the life study of Romans? The life study of Romans is a very thick, detailed study of going through the book of Romans. It was done in a conference. It was polished messages, and it was published. And there's a lot to it. Every book of the Bible, Old and New Testament, has a life study. And then there's also a crystallization study. And then sometimes there's special books that just talk about those things, maybe under a different heading, but that's what they do. A lot of talk about the different things of the Bible. There's a lot of ministry material. There was Witness Lee, Watchman Nee were very prolific, right? Not saying that they only have like 3 or 4 things. You could just spend your whole life just reading their stuff, but they want you to do that. They don't want you to read anything else. Really, they don't. Now, they may say it's okay, but here was the test for me. If you go to one of their meetings and you say it's time for people to stand up and share, right? They have different kinds of meetings where the congregation speaks. It's not just one man speaking. It's the whole congregation has an opportunity to speak, with restriction, right? There's oversight. It's not just anything goes. And usually it's limited in time. There's somebody on a piano at 1 minute, hitting the key and, sit down after 1 minute and 30 or 2 minutes or whatever the time limit is, which is actually a lot more stressful than it may sound. So if you walk into one of those meetings and you want to share something from the Max Lucado book you bought, say it's even in line with what everyone else is talking about, right? So let's see. There was a book I read by Max Lucado back in the 90s, and The Applause of Heaven was the name of the book. And in that book, he gives a story of going to heaven and meeting Jesus and the whole heavenly host and getting a standing ovation, well done, my faithful servant. And, the mental picture that he painted, what I remember of it was like coming off of an airplane and your family is there to greet you. Remember the days when you could go to the airport and greet somebody as they stepped off the plane? You didn't have to wait till they got through security. You could meet them right at the gate, right? Or let's just say you're at the end of security and there's a whole group of people there to welcome you. That is an amazing feeling. And I remember reading that in the 90s and just being brought to tears with the sentimentality of that all. But if I stood up in a meeting and say we were even talking about well done, good and faithful servant, those verses, and I brought up this book, I would be asked to sit down. They may allow it once, especially if I'm a newcomer. But if I was there and they let me in, but let's say I was there and I was in good standing and I stood up, having gone to the full-time training in Anaheim, having been trained, having been affiliated with Living Stream Ministry, been on the payroll there, produced some ministry materials there. If I had had that kind of status and I stood up and started sharing something from Max Lucado, it wouldn't go well. It wouldn't go well. They may let me finish what I was saying, but they would talk to me afterward because that's just not right. Now, why is it not right? That's a great question, and they're going to have to answer that. But that's just the way it is. Now, if this was the Catholic Church and you're like, well, the Catholic Church has a catechism, you're supposed to stay true to that. You're supposed to stay true to what the Pope says. Or if it was Lutheranism and it's like, well, that's not from Luther and it's not from one of the Reformed teachings. And, why are you bringing up something that's from outsiders? Max Lucado, he's disciple or Church of Christ. That's, what are you doing? Goodness, right? So, if you did that, you would say, well, but that's their denomination. They have a choice. And you know what? The local church can also make that decision. They can also have that restriction. And I'm okay with it. I just don't like the fact that they deny they have that restriction. It's just ridiculous. All of these excuses and fancy ways of saying that they have the restriction without having the restriction. It's like, well, we just want to have the best stuff and we want to have stuff that's not mixed and we want to have stuff that'll build up the body of Christ. And if it comes from a denominational source, it's going to have a denominational taint to it. And we don't want that. So we want it to be pure and just building up and edifying. And this has been approved and this has been sanctified and this is up. No, it's just, you just want the stuff that comes from your group. And that's okay. A lot of groups do that. It's the problem is when people come in and say that's not what they're doing. That's the problem, right? So that was the number one thing that I started with. The second thing that I had brought up was looking back at my own recruitment, the way I joined, and I have all this in my channel. I went into it, and basically the short story is when I was a freshman at freshman orientation, I went to the University of North Texas, which was NTSU for 6 more months when I got there, and then it became UNT. At the freshman orientation, there was a table set up by the group Christian Students, and it was an amazing table. I think it was, what color was that? I forgot what color it was. It was a very striking color banner thing on the table. It overhung the table, and I could see it. I'm just not remembering exactly what the color was. It was significant what the color was. Anyway, I'm sorry. It was 1985. I forgot the exact name of the color. Apologies. But it said Christian Students, and I'll never forget. Because there I was, and I, at that time, was an evangelical Christian. I had participated in several different groups. I had been under the teaching of a Bible church pastor who had come to a youth Bible study that I was involved in. He was invited. I didn't know who he was. I'd never heard of him before. Turns out he was a big name in Austin, in a Bible church in Austin called Lakeshore Christian Fellowship, I think. Or Lakeshore Bible Church, something like that. Anyway, this man was a very gentle soul. He was a graduate of Dallas Theological Seminary, also a dispensationalist. And he came to our little Bible study in San Antonio, Texas, which was just high school students and early college students that knew each other organically, just kind of as friends, kind of knew each other. And he came and he taught us because we didn't really have any teacher. And that was kind of my first exposure to Bible church stuff, Bible churches, and the Ryrie Study Bible, dispensationalism. And we had studied the book of Ephesians. We were looking into these things. And I remember that. It was very significant to me, very significant. And he even baptized me in the 80s in an outdoor swimming pool in November. It was cold. It was cold. In Texas still, it was cold. And so that did happen. So I was not a newcomer to studying the Bible. I was very young. I didn't have any formal training, and I had this one teacher. And then, of course, I had read things on my own. But that was kind of my introduction. And I had this desire to know Christians without denominations, because at that time I had been a radio DJ in San Antonio at a Christian radio station, one of the Salem Christian stations in San Antonio, KSLR, Sunlight Radio, where the sun shines bright day and night. Yes, that was the tagline. And so I was there, and I got to listen to so many different Bible teachers, from nationally known Bible teachers down to local San Antonio ones. And there's a lot of different flavors, right? You go from McGee to Swindoll, to the local, who's the guy, big heavy guy, Cornerstone, Hagee. Yeah, go to Hagee. You know, it's a different flavor for those different teachers. And then you have other teachers as well. Who is the one from Living? Anyway, the point is, I realized that there was all these different flavors, there's all these different perspectives, but supposedly we're all supposed to be Christians and we're supposed to be one. So when I went to the college campus, when I walked in to the freshman orientation area as an 18-year-old, just out of high school, just graduated high school, walked in freshman orientation, there was the table, Christian students. And on that table were all of these little booklets, and this will come up later, called rainbow booklets. And they're called rainbow because they're colorful. They're little tracts that are colorful. And they're excerpts of Witness Lee's life study messages, which had already mentioned that those are studies of the Bible. So these little booklets were just all over the table, little short messages. Some of them were topical, but most of them were excerpts from Bible studies. And I saw this, and I thought, Christian students on this campus, all the Christian groups have dropped their names and have joined together just to be one for the testimony, of the Lord, so that they're not pushing an agenda. They're just Christians. That's what I thought, because it was the only Christian table I could see. And the reason is they had been given a prime real estate spot. When you walked into freshman orientation, there was a first room, then there was a back room. And in the first room were all of the main groups. And there was this table, Christian students. So all the names that I expected to see out of college campus groups were there, but there were no Christian groups except for this one table, Christian students. So my mind was, that's the only Christian group there is. I didn't know about the other room yet. And in the other room, there were a bunch of different Christian organizations all stuffed into that little room. Anyway, so they were given this position. And that really worked in their favor, because when I walked up, well, depending on how you think of my involvement with the group, if it was positive or negative, probably by now you probably think it's negative. Oh, well. But at the time, it sold me. I believed them that they were what they said they were, and that is they're outside of denominations, outside of groups. Now, at that time, they told me, the booklets were there. They told me they were affiliated with Witness Lee. All those booklets had the name Witness Lee on them. So they weren't hiding that. They had some books by Watchman Nee also. And they showed their Bible. They had various they had their own translation, and they had samples available. At that time, they hadn't all been combined in together into one binding, but they had individual books of the Bible, especially the New Testament. And so there was nothing hidden. You knew this group, that they have their own publications, they have their teacher, Witness Lee, they have a Bible that they're producing, and you can look at it and read it if you want to. It was all right there. So I sat there for a long time looking through the booklets, reading things. And I remember I picked up a booklet called The Two Aspects of the Two Baptisms of the Spirit. And there was, the booklet basically said there's a essential aspect of the Holy Spirit, the baptism of the Holy Spirit, and then there's a economical aspect, meaning that when Jesus breathed into them and said, receive the Holy Spirit, that was them receiving the essential Spirit for life. And then in Acts 2, when the Spirit came down upon them, it was to prepare them and empower them for work, kind of like wearing a uniform. And so that was a different aspect of the experience of the Spirit. And it wasn't inward for life, it was outward for power. And I'm like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, right? You're born again, you have a new life, but then you have power and authority to go do God's purpose. And I thought, man, that's really good. I like that. And actually, the pastor that I was under at that time back home in San Antonio, he had shared that exact same thing. Turns out he was reading from the ministry of Witness Lee, and he was using that to his congregation. I didn't know it at the time, but yeah, that's what was going on. So I was primed. I'm like, wow, it's great. This group is all about just being Christian. They have good teaching. They have this very deep understanding of the two aspects of the Spirit, which I had heard back home from my pastor and I agree with, and I heard them say the same thing. This is really good. I like this. So that was kind of my introduction. One thing that wasn't so wonderful, though, and it really caused me to question at that moment, but I got past it, which was when I asked them what church they went to, they said, we're not affiliated with the church. Huh? Okay, well, where do you meet? Oh, we meet in different places. Some of us meet together as the church in Denton, because that University of North Texas is in Denton, but not everyone does. Some meet in other places. We're just a campus Christian organization, though. We have no church requirement, and we are not affiliated with a church in this city. We're independent. Really, with all those booklets and all that stuff. And I'm like, this doesn't make sense, because I knew enough about Witness Lee at that moment to know that he had a thing called the local church. So how could this not be part of that? Well, obviously, they didn't want to admit it, because that might get them in trouble with the administration, proselytizing for a specific church. I don't know if that's really the case and what would have happened, because honestly, there were other campus groups that were affiliated with local specific churches. So I'm not quite sure there. I do know this. They were very gun shy about people who thought they were a C word. They were a cult, and they were very, very uptight about this. If someone called them a cult, they got very, very upset. They didn't like this, and they would want to avoid that. So they didn't want to be affiliated with this C word group, because it had become very popular in some Christian circles to call them the C word. So they would hide that affiliation a little bit, I guess. I mean, the booklets were there. You could see it. But when you asked them, they were shy. They said, no, we're not affiliated, whatever. I did not like that. But I don't know. These are adults, and they seem to be okay with it. Maybe I'm just odd, right? So first lesson in trusting yourself, trust yourself. Something's weird, say it's weird. But they had a response. They have a response for everything. So that was that experience, right? So that was the second thing that I wanted to bring up, was their recruitment practices, even for me, which seemed to be very above board, became very different. It was not that many years later, after 1985, that the church in Austin began approaching the college work differently. Now, in the United States, most college campuses are the focal point of the local church's work. And that's actually why local churches ended up in the cities that they did. They were targeting college students. That was on purpose. That was their goal, was to get people from the college campuses for the church life, what they call the church life. And this was a stated goal. It was planned, it was organized, and people gave up a lot in order to do it. So the church in Austin, which had a campus work on the University of Texas at Austin, started a different approach, and that was to be hidden. They wanted to be hidden. So they no longer would go to freshman orientation with a book table that said Christian students on it with Witness Lee books. They wouldn't do that, at least not in when that change was made by Don Looper back in the 90s. Instead, they would meet students and arrange to have Bible studies with them. And they would go up and approach them on campus, and maybe they had a table or something, but they were very, very benign, very, very standard. Nothing about Witness Lee, nothing about the Lord's Recovery, the ground of the church, nothing like that. Just generic evangelical Jesus talk, even to the point where they didn't bring their Bible that was published by Living Stream Ministry. They brought some other Bible. I don't know which one they settled on, but probably ASV, but it probably varied, or King James. They probably went with King James, just to be as generic and unoffensive as possible. Now you could say, oh, well, that's nice. They don't want to bring in their own denominational quirks into the relationship with the students. Oh, no, you misunderstand. They wanted to get them into those quirky meetings with the quirky ways and the literature by Living Stream Ministry. They had not given up on those things. They continued that. They just wanted to build a human relationship, an emotional connection with the students before they introduced them to these scary things like our own translation of the Bible, or a leader who's got a funny name and who comes from a funny place. China's not funny, but to a Texan, China's a funny place, especially to have a Christian minister. It's like, there are no Christian ministers in the United States. What's going on? Right? So these kinds of problems they overcame by hiding it and not talking about it until they had this emotional connection with the students, and they could bring them into the meetings of the local church, and they could get over these problems and these reactions to this way, which I called grooming, not in a sexual deviant type way, but grooming in the sense of intentionally leading someone down a path, carefully guiding their experience to get them from point A, where they like being, to point B, where they would not have intended to go if you had told them that's where the destination was, but to get them there through an emotional process that links you together with them. That's their recruitment strategy on college campuses today. It doesn't look like it did when I was brought in. It looks really, really different. It really looks sketchy, really sketchy. As a matter of fact, their main group there, University of Texas at Austin, will have college meetings, and they will invite speakers. And these speakers, they come and they're very prominent in their fields, professors with great tenure. They'll have people that have a science background. I remember there was one astrophysicist who spoke at UCLA back in the 90s, and I went to hear his talk. It was really good. It was an amazing talk. And he's not a lightweight. He's a true astrophysicist, and he was there to speak positively about the gospel, and then someone else followed up with the hard-hitting gospel message, which is fine fare. That happens all the time. There's a lot of Christian groups that do this. But what they don't normally do is hide the fact that they're affiliated with the local church, that they've maybe spoken at Living Stream Ministry functions. They treat them like they're just some random person who was brought in by this group. Oh gosh, we've never met, kind of a thing, which is just weird. Why would you do that? Why not say, oh, this person meets with us on Sunday. Also, they're a qualified scientist, and we'd like to have them talk to open the message. What's wrong with that? Why do you need to hide that? There's a mentality that if we don't hide it, it will cause problems, so we better hide it. That's a weird mentality. It's not very honest. It doesn't even have to be that way. Again, just like with the books, if you don't want those books to be read that are not published by Living Stream Ministry, just admit it. Don't deny it. Just go through a long process of explaining that's not what you're doing, and then do it. Just do it. Just own it. Just take it. Now, we only recommend these books. That's it. It's just easier that way. That's it. You could do it. You could say, yeah, if you read those other books, don't bring them up in the meetings. Instead of hemming and hawing and trying to manipulate the situation, just say it. And in the same way, go on the college campuses and say, hey, we're here to recruit people to our church. Yeah, that's right. We want to help people study the Bible with our materials and go to our meetings. And eventually go to our 2-year training program and serve the Lord through our community for the rest of their life. That's what we'd like to do, right? What's wrong with that? Does the Catholic Church not admit that? Do they say, oh, no, we're just here to help students, and if they end up being Baptist, that's okay? They don't do that. I don't know, maybe they do. But the point is, why would you want to hide the fact that you have a very specific goal? Even if the Catholic Church would be okay with college students going to Baptist church later. I don't know, maybe they are. I have no idea. But even if that were the case, that is not the case with the local church. If you are under the shepherding of a local church shepherd, full-timer, and you end up not staying with the local church, that is a sad day for that shepherd. It is a loss. It is a failure to not bring you in. There's no joy of, wow, we helped this person love the Lord, and look at them. They're going on with whatever Christian group, and they're having the time of their life. No. They've left the Lord's recovery. They've left God's best. They won't make the kingdom. They'll suffer for 1,000 years before eternity, and all these kinds of problems, right? It won't be good. They won't be able to overcome, or if they do, it'll be very hard. We regret for them, and they've gone back to the world, or they've taken the easy path, or they don't have the vision. Something. It's a failure. It's absolute failure. So why not be honest about it? Why hide it? Why pretend that it's anything else but that? That's one of the other things I talked about. Another thing that I brought up, and notice that both of these first two things are relating to some doctrinal positions, because everything has to be based on some kind of doctrine. But they're not specifically about doctrine. They're about control. They're about deception. They're about approaching young people that are vulnerable on the campus and taking advantage of their naivete and guiding them through a process where you know the ending, but they don't. That, to me, is unethical. Absolutely. So it's not about doctrine. It's about a practice, and it's about a system within the group, and it's about the group's effects on people. The other thing that I brought up in my videos that was a main point was the way it deals with detractors. Now, there's lawsuits. People may have heard about the local church and its proclivity to sue people. They do have the Defense and Confirmation Project, DCP, which specifically will gather intel on people that are dissenting or they think might be dissenting. They'll gather that intel and they'll contact people and warn them that, we could go to court over this. I don't know what else they might say, but this isn't accurate. When you were having this problem, no one talked about it, but maybe someone should talk about it. This type of stuff. Because to them, if you are publicly not promoting them, then you're harming them. If you talk about them, if you say, yeah, I have some questions about this group, boom, right there, you are negative. You are an enemy. Yeah, you're dangerous, and they don't have any problem treating you that way at all. If somebody is openly, publicly against them on the internet or in a community, you're in league with the devil. So what kind of grace do we give the devil? None. Why would we give you any grace? Yeah. So, very high control, very insular. And that's just the nature of the group. So if someone is like that, and if they are a woman, say a mid-30s mother, this group has stood up in their official trainings. It's like a big conference. It's international, but it's called a training. You have to pay to get into it. You travel from around the world. You have to be accepted into the thing. It's considered a training. You're supposed to go to these meetings. It's it's one of the 7 feasts, like in the Old Testament. You're supposed to go up to Jerusalem 7 times a year. So these things are very official, highly recommended. And this is where the Blended Brothers, which is basically the council of leadership in the local church, in the Lord's Recovery, the Blended Brothers give out their edicts. I don't know how else to put it. That's what it is. So they do it through their teaching, but then they'll come out and say things explicitly. It won't just be about, the Bible suggests that maybe. No, they'll come out and say something like this woman who was among us and wrote an open letter talking about things that she had found that were hidden from her, that she did not know about, and that caused her to have doubts when she brought this up. She's the spirit of Jezebel. Yeah, she's evil, and she will be punished. And she is what she is doing. Her rebellion must cease. Yeah, everything in the Bible that's against rebellion was hurled at this woman and her husband, who harmed himself not long after. There was a follow-up meeting that was given to people like me that had been through the full-time training, because she and her husband had gone through the full-time training. And so people went there, and it was basically, 2 minutes hate, speaking negatively about them. It was, all of these accusations are terrible, they're false. We're sad that this woman did this, and we hope that she's okay. But you know what? We have to oppose this. And then you had people of their own volition who were not the Blended Brothers, but were people like me who had been through the training, stand up and say, what she's doing is harming my heritage. And this is my purpose on earth, the Lord's Recovery. And what she's doing must be stopped, right? This kind of garbage, just really terrible. This is not the way a healthy group operates. First of all, the things that she had found that were hidden, why were they hidden? Why were they hidden? Why were they not talked about? I don't mean accusations about abuse. Some of that stuff is sensitive, and I understand that. It should be shared with law enforcement, right? It should not be hidden and covered up, and people shouldn't be given a free pass for that. And a lot of groups do give the free passes. We're dealing with that all the time. But I'm talking about things on a different level. Things like failed business ventures, where there's very little abuse in this. I mean, there's abuse in the sense that if you have a business venture and you're also the up-to-date oracle of God, it tends to give people encouragement to invest in your business venture. So there's some abuse there, but this isn't the level of abuse where, someone is harmed in the back room. I don't mean that, but abusing position in a sense for personal gain, that happens. And that's ugly, but it doesn't rise to some crazy level. But anyway, let's say it's not even about that. It's just a failed business deal. Why can you not talk about that? So specifically, this is about Daystar, which was an RV company built on some Dodge platforms, these highly elegant, over-the-top luxury RVs in the 70s. Right at the time the gas crisis happened in the 70s. Can you imagine? It'd be like coming out with a big gas guzzler this week when the Strait of Hormuz has been closed off for a week. That's not the time to put a gas guzzler on the market. That's basically what happened in the 70s. It was a big failure, business-wise. But you know what? Businesses fail a lot. I live in the Bay Area in California. There's a lot of failed businesses around here, and probably some more this week will fail if you've seen the stock market lately. It is really, really common for a startup business to fail. This is not a sign of the devil if you fail in a startup business. So why would you hide it? Why would you need to hide the fact that this occurred? If you're in the group, you don't know about Daystar unless you were there. Now, it has come up now because of this faithful sister who published her open letter, which I did an episode on, and she brought it up. Well, there was not just that one. There was the tennis racket business failure that was also one of the main oracle's sons who had been involved in that venture. And before that, there was some kind of clothing startup thing. And anyway, there's a lot of these business ventures which failed. Now, actually, I'm not against the idea of using a business venture to fund the ministry. If you've studied some history about different Christian groups over the centuries, like there's a group called Oneida, and they're a Christian community, and they make silverware, and they're really good at it. That became their funding source to allow them to live according to their faith, the way they want to believe, independently from any other kind of like trying to go raise money and beg and all that. They make silverware and they sell it, and they've got a really good name for it. I don't know if that's still the case, but that's how that got started, as far as my understanding is. The point is, if somebody says, hey, you know what, I could start a business just for myself, but I'm going to start a business and it's going to fund the ministry, I'm not opposed to that. I don't see the real big problem with that. As a matter of fact, in the 90s, there was a attempt to start self-publishing small businesses where Living Stream Ministry would help someone who wanted to serve the Lord full time get the equipment to do desktop publishing, which at that time, like with the what was the name of the hardware? Anyway, there were some computers and printers that could do professional publishing in a home, in a small business area. And you could fund your activities as a missionary with publishing work. And I thought it was a great idea. It's like instead of asking people to fund it or spending time trying to beg or going without, right, and not being able to continue the work, have a business that funds your work. I didn't see that was a big problem. And that's kind of how I saw these things like the Daystar and the tennis racket thing. So when they were hidden and they're not talked about and they're embarrassed because, it's a slight. If you're the minister of the age, if you're God's oracle, if you're God's deputy authority, and you fail to see that the oil crisis in the 70s was going to tank your luxury RV, maybe put some doubts in people's minds. So let's just not talk about it, right? So anyway, this young woman, she wrote about these things, talked about things that had been hidden. that a group that she grew up in, she had no idea about these things. Now, a group that doesn't hide and doesn't pretend to that things are all peachy keen and there's no problems, the members would not be shocked to learn about these things. It would be part of the ethos. Even I pointed out, the group is called the Lord's Recovery because it's supposed to be taking the church from a degraded state and recovering it back to the elevated state that Jesus intended. That's the whole thought process behind that. And that goes in line with dispensationalism, which believes that the church is in a fallen state and needs to be recovered or restored. This is a very common pattern among, especially from groups that start in the 1800s. It wasn't just dispensationalism. There was the Restoration movement, which out of that came the Disciples of Christ and the Church of Christ movements. So this idea, and actually LDS is the same thing. It's the restoration, right, of the church. So this was a very common thing in the 1800s, and dispensationalism was one of those things that believed this kind of way about the degraded state and being recovered. So if you have this concept that things are not where they should be, but God is making them better, that's not a bad thought. Why not use that in talking about, hey, in the 70s, we made some mistakes. We did some business ventures that ended up not being so great. Learned a big lesson. Let's stay with what we know. We know God's word. We don't know business. We don't know the market economy. We're not going to pretend to do that anymore. Why not do that? Say, we made a mistake and we've learned from that. And you know what? We all can learn from that. And that's why this is the Lord's recovery. Because even when we make mistakes, God is there to... There's an easy way to handle all of these problems. And it starts with something that's very Christian, which is confessing your sins to one another. Anyway, so this problem exists in this group. So instead of confessing their sins, they will tear down a sister who points out the problems and call her evil and Jezebel. It's absolutely horrific. And if you've heard those messages, the vitriol at which the blended brothers who speak and tear her down, especially the ones who come in and try to sound like they're being sympathetic. Oh, we're so sympathetic and we really care about this. And, you know, we need to be careful about mental health. And they sound like this, but really what they're doing is tearing down that person to discredit them. Oh my gosh, it is so vile. Why not just say, you know what? Some people have made mistakes, and some of those people have been highly positioned in the group. But when we found that out, we did what the Bible says to do, and we dealt with it. Why not do that instead of pretend, right? So this is normally what my channel is about regarding the local church, the Lord's Recovery, things like that. So I mentioned that some things had come up in my inbox. So I just want to kind of go over them. And I have some of these set aside here. So let me pull these open, see if I can find it. Here we go. All right. So this came in today. Now, it wasn't 12 hours ago. It was earlier today that I copied this. But this is where this is from. It's from one of the comments on one of my posts. And it's a public post, so I'm just going to share everything about it because it's already public. My husband and I lead a non-denominational Bible study, not a megachurch denominational, true non-denominational. We live in a small lake community, and 2 of our study group are from the local church in Spokane. It has caused quite a stir because the woman tried passing out the Recovery Bible in our community church and got formal notices to stop. Now, first of all, the Recovery Bible, there is a Bible sold in Christian bookstore called the Recovery Bible, and it has to do with 12-step programs. That's not the same thing. This Recovery Bible is the recovery version of the Bible, RV, Recovery Version Bible. Anyway, the recovery version. So that's important, by Living Stream Ministry. It's kind of like the Scofield Reference Bible. It has a lot of footnotes that contain the teachings of the group mixed in there with the Bible, so you have it like in one volume. You remember those life study messages I was talking about earlier? If you caught that? where there's a big, intense studies over several decades going through every book of the Bible. Those were condensed down and footnotes were made to encapsulate those teachings. Is there anything wrong with that? No, that is a practice that a lot of different groups do. The recovery version of the Bible is one of those things. I'm not here to say it's bad. I'm just here to say that it is. And it's not the same thing as the Recovery Bible, which is 12-step stuff. All right. She recently tried to pass out Witness Lee materials at a nearby Methodist church, and they told her to stop. See, this is what denominations can do and pastors can do. They can restrict what people share at their meetings, and they can be honest about it and say, we don't want that shared here. And you know what? That's that group's practice. If that Methodist group says, oh, no, we don't restrict it, and then restricted it, I would be calling that out too as being hypocritical, just like what the local church does. Just admit it, own it. She owns it right here. We told her to stop. What's wrong with that? Nothing's wrong with that. You can do that in your own group. Anyway, all right. Another man from the local church comes, but keeps it a secret to us. So they know he's from the local church, which if you've known someone from the local church, they're pretty easy to spot. And he tries to hide it. Oh my gosh, I did this in the 90s. I would go to some kind of Christian function and I would pretend just to be general and generic. And oh my goodness, why would I do that? Well, it's because that's the way I was trained, by example and by actual teaching, to do that, to hide where you're from. It is so ridiculous. Just be honest. What is wrong with that? And you actually look worse when you do this. It's so funny to me. She also invited 3 couples to our home a year ago from the local church and didn't warn us. Now, I'm editing as I'm reading because when I type on YouTube, I can't spell anything. So I'm not blaming this woman for that. That's just dealing with YouTube. So I'm going to edit as I think I understand. She didn't warn us, which is like, why would you do that? Because you want to ambush people. You think, if I can just get them in front of the brothers, they will see the light, and I don't have to tell her because she wouldn't want that. It's ridiculous. It turned out bad when they tried to convince us of their doctrine. No joke. At this time, the woman is causing her husband to not want to go to church any longer as he does not agree with the local church, and she argues with men in churches everywhere. Common pattern. This last week, she got very upset with us about our studies on apostles. She said there are modern-day apostles because it's very helpful for Witness Lee to be an apostle, right? She said there are modern-day apostles. What is the local church, Witness Lee's view on people becoming apostles in this day? It is causing strife among us. Thank you. Well, the answer is, officially, Witness Lee is not an apostle. Witness Lee says, I am not an apostle. On the other hand, he's appointed by God to lead the churches, to establish elders in every city, the apostolic function. So, yeah, he's not called an apostle. He is called God's deputy authority and the oracle of God. Yeah, the mouthpiece of God. So maybe not an apostle, but an oracle and a mouthpiece. And you say, no, it's not him, it's the ministry. Okay, great. Distinction without a difference. It's his ministry. So if you say, it's not him, it's his ministry, okay. Who else has that ministry? No one. Or we all do. We can all repeat what he says. Oh, I get it. Okay. Yeah, that's called a distinction without a difference. All right. So what this lady is describing here in this comment, and I don't know this lady, I've just seen this for the very first time. What she's describing is not necessarily the actions of the leadership in the church in Spokane. Okay, this, I would say the church in Spokane probably does not know that this is going on. So I would tell Deanne Darlene, sorry, hard to read this. Anyway, I would tell this woman that she could contact the church in Spokane, they're in the phone book, and say, hey, are you doing this on purpose? And they would say no. And they'll go talk to this woman and say, you know what? Let's try a different way. Let's try a different way. They wouldn't like this. And I know that from my own experience in dealing with these people. The leadership in the local churches are, generally speaking, pretty upright. I mean, there's problems. I'm not saying there's no problems, but generally speaking, they're there with a view, and they don't want to cause problems like this. This is not their goal. Maybe in the 70s it was, but it's not in 2026. That's not what's going on. There's other things you can do, and you don't have to do this. They would not like this. So I'm just pointing that out. This is not something I think that is like the Blended Brothers are there from the podium at one of the 7 feasts saying, go and sneak into the local denominations and trick them into, no, I don't think that. They are doing that deception work on the college campus, which is probably why this woman thinks that she can do this, because she's seeing it happen on the college campus. And she's like, well, I can't fit on the college campus. I'm not the right age, but I can go into a local church, another local denomination, and I can do the same thing. That might be what's happening in her mind, that she thinks this is okay because she sees this being worked out there in Pullman at University of Washington, or whatever it's called. No, University of Washington, Seattle. That's Washington State University. Yeah, WSU. Cougs. Yeah, she's probably seeing that and she's thinking, well, I can do that. I would bet that's what's happening. If this woman and her husband called the local church elders in Spokane, they would probably put a stop to this, honestly. Even the guy who's coming in pretending like he's not from the local church, they'd probably say, what are you doing? Don't do that. Yeah, but it's creepy, right? It's creepy. Okay, so that's the first comment. Now I want to do a second comment. But first, I see that there's people in the chat. Oh my gosh. Oh, look at that. That sucks trying to get one guy out of the cult. Okay. Caught you live, heard Jezebel thing. Yeah, it does. It is bad. Okay. I'm not quite following every comment there. That's okay. But I'm here to talk about these other things as well. So let's continue. Live is fun. It's a lot of fun. I'm new to that. So this I put together. This was a comment that was left on one of my posts, and it's very typical. And it wasn't 4 days ago. This was months ago. I copied this right after it happened, 4 days after it happened, and I've had this sitting up ready to go for that amount of time. I just haven't been able to have this session, so I'm having it now. Yeah. So this comment is about deception or description. Is the local church of Witness Lee a dishonest designation? And this is a YouTube comment from Mr. A. Combiths, something. Yeah. So he writes, and this is so typical. Without the ministry of Witness Lee, just how are you going to know the difference between your soul and spirit? How are you going to know what is God's economy? How are you going to know that Jesus Christ is the reality of the good land of Canaan? How are you going to know what is the ground of the local church? How are you going to know what is it to exercise your spirit? How are you going to know what are the 3 stages of salvation? How are you going to know that the 3 of the Trinity are distinct, but they are not separate, etc., etc., etc.? So this is this person's point. So this came up because I had said that the local church, in fact, does restrict its people to its own ministry, and it promotes its ministry as very unique and the only source for God's up-to-date move. And he's explaining why this is, because of these things that you cannot know. So let's take the first one, soul and spirit. Let's look at the New American Standard Bible, 1995. For the word of God is living and active and sharper than any two-edged sword and piercing as far as the division of soul and spirit, both of joints and marrow, and able to judge the thoughts and intentions of the heart. So here's a Bible verse from a non-Living Stream Ministry version of the Bible that mentions the division of soul and spirit. So my answer to this question, how are you going to know the difference between your soul and spirit, is you would read this verse and interpret it as saying that there is a difference between the soul and the spirit. It's not that hard. Now, you could read this and interpret it in a different way. There are many different ways of interpreting these Bible verses. But as far as just reading what the Bible says in English in this translation, which itself has interpretation built into it, another story, the point is, he asked, how could you know this? And the answer could just be, I read the Bible. I didn't need to read Witness Lee. It's not that mysterious. All right, let's go to the next one. How are you going to know what is God's economy? And then there's, in parentheses, it's GK, and it gives a reference, 1 Timothy 1:4. And it's very important to have the GK there. That stands for Greek, meaning if you read this in a regular translation into English, you'll miss it. It's only the way we understand the translation according to our reading of the Greek that this makes sense in the way we like it. And this is not a small deal. God's economy is the main teaching and the main lens for interpreting the Bible for this group. That's how this group interprets the Bible. It's through the lens of what they call God's economy. Everything is looked at through the lens of God's economy. This is the keystone for understanding the Bible. If you see a Bible verse and you're not sure what does it mean, think back to what God's economy is and see how it fits into that, and that's your answer. It is a unifying, one purpose, one meaning key to understanding the Bible from Genesis to Revelation. Everything. If it doesn't fit within God's economy, it's not important. This is what some today are talking about, a univocal view of understanding the Bible, that the Bible was written over centuries by many different authors in many different places and different languages, but behind it, the Spirit was guiding its production, and it has a certain meaning, definite, distinct meaning. And that meaning to this group is what they call God's economy. So what is God's economy? And why haven't I heard of it from anybody else? Well, let's take a look. So again, New American Standard Version of the Bible. Let's look at those verses. And here, Paul is writing ostensibly, but let's just go with what's claimed. Paul writes to Timothy, "As I urged you upon my departure from Macedonia, remain on at Ephesus, so that you may instruct certain men not to teach strange doctrines, nor to pay attention to myths and endless genealogies, which strange teachings, myths, and genealogies give rise to mere speculation rather than furthering the administration of God, which is by faith." Seems pretty clear. He's saying, if you pay attention to these strange teachings, myths, unending genealogies, strange doctrines, you will be involved in speculation, in doubting, instead of paying attention to the furtherance of God's administration, which is by faith. God's administration is by faith. So you are contradicting God's move by focusing on these non-essential strange teachings. It seems pretty clear that that's what it's talking about. But that's because we're reading the English. We need to read the Greek. So let's go take a look at this. This is an excerpt of the Recovery Version of the Bible, and it reads a little different. And it says, I'll just skip down to, that you might charge certain ones not to teach different things. It doesn't say strange, just says different things, nor to give heed to myths and unending genealogies, which produce questionings rather than God's economy, which is in faith. Oh, God's economy. Well, that's because in Greek, it's the word oikonomia, which literally would be transliterated as economy. Oikonomia is economy. That's where we get the word from. It's just transliterated from the Greek. Oikonomia means household administration, the administration of a household, how you govern the household, how you handle the dispensation of the household, or how you dispense the goods within the household, where who gets what food, who gets what room, who gets what chore, this kind of administration of a household. So the teaching here is that God's economy is God's way of arranging things. And if you heard what I just read, which produced questionings rather than God's economy, you would say, oh, it's the same thing, just different words. It's like if you pay attention to these different teachings, you have questionings rather than, God administrating his household, which is actually not a bad way of reading this verse. But that's not how the local church reads this. They say, which produce questionings rather than God's economy, is in opposition to different things. So the good teachings are God's economy, not the other kinds of teachings, which also includes myths and unending genealogies. But it's not just that. It's anything that's different. And you're like, different than what? Right. Different than what Witness Lee teaches. Huh? That's not what it means. No, it is. That's exactly what it means. If you teach not strange doctrines, but different things, not wrong things, just different things, that is in opposition to God's economy. You need to teach God's economy. What is God's economy? Well, it's the full embodiment of what Witness Lee teaches. It has to do with God dispensing himself into man to produce the church, to end up with the New Jerusalem for eternity. That's just, just kind of in a real quick nutshell. There's a song about it. This is all of Witness Lee's teaching. This is how you understand the Bible. So to understand the Bible, you have to have God's economy, which is given only to Witness Lee. He's the only one that talks about God's economy this way. People talk about God's economy, they talk about money. He's talking about God's economy. He means his way of teaching, showing God's purpose throughout all the ages and how all things work together to produce the local church, which becomes the body of Christ, which becomes the kingdom in the kingdom age, which then becomes ultimately the New Jerusalem, which God and man mingle together for eternity. This is what God is doing, and he's doing it through the up-to-date ministry, which happens to belong to Witness Lee. So if you don't hold to Witness Lee's teaching in his view, then you're teaching differently and you're producing questionings. Get the point? That is this is the locus of control. It's like, well, where does that control come from in the local church? That's where it comes from, right there. So this person asks, how are you going to know what is God's economy? Well, you only know what God's economy is if you read Witness Lee's definition and invention of God's economy in the way he's doing it. So no one's going to know this except for Witness Lee and those who learn from him, because he came up with this. It's his. No one else has talked about that. Not even Watchman Nee talked about this. This was Witness Lee's. It's very brilliant. You get a controlling vision by controlling the vision. If you're the only one who has the vision and you define it, then you're in charge of it. It's yours. It's pretty brilliant, to be honest. All right, so the next thing. How are you going to know what is the ground of a local church? And you're like, what are you talking about, ground of the local church? And it gives a verse, Revelation 1:11. Let's take a look. Yeah, I'd gone back. I included this slide. This is Darby. So John Nelson Darby factors big in the group in the history. And his translation also adds the word furthers God's dispensation, meaning that the teaching is not in opposition to other doctrines. It's this God's dispensation is in opposition to questions. So you can either be questioning or you could be allowing God to do his move among men. This is not to do with teaching. It's about God's operation within the group. And what we teach affects that, which is important too and can be used to control, but not to the extent that Witness Lee's interpretation of God's economy controls. That is a deeper level of control. Anyway, wanted to point out that Darby even had the view of furthering God's dispensation as in opposition to questionings, not teachings. Anyway. All right, so let's go here. Revelation 1:11. What you saying? What you write in a book what you see, and send it to the 7 churches: to Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, Laodicea. So he says the 7 churches, and he names 7 cities. Therefore, a church is a city. That's what this is. That's Revelation 1:11. It's an equation that I learned back in Texas. Acts 14:23 and Titus 1:5 equals Revelation 1:11. Paul says, I left you here to appoint elders in every church. I left you here to appoint elders in every city, in the other verse. So church and city, elders are over a church or they're over a city. Revelation 1:11, 7 churches, 7 cities. So Acts 14:23 plus Titus 1:5 equals Revelation 1:11. That is the indoctrination of the ground of the church. What is the church? What does it constitute by? It's by the boundary of a city, and every Christian in there needs to be under one eldership because the elders are appointed according to the city, according to the church. So if your eldership is not the local church eldership, you're not in the local church practically. You're a member of the local church by birth, but not practically. That's how they get around saying they're the church in that city. They're not saying that there aren't other Christians. They're saying that they are the true eldership. They're the true administration of the church in that city. Every other administration is false. That's what they're saying. So that's what this is about. So his question was, how could you know the ground of the church without this? And it's a great question because you have to first assume that there really is the ground of the church, that this doctrine is real and it's relevant and it's important and we have to follow it above all things else. And if you say, well, it's in the Bible, we have to follow it above all things else, then you're going to have a problem. Because in the 90s, when some were saying, hey, Living Stream can't tell us what to do, administration is local in the local churches. We're the leaders locally. It's the boundary here. You can't administer it from afar. You have to be a local elder. You can't tell the churches what to do. You have to let the elders do that. Then Witness Lee said, the local churches aren't the goal. It's the procedure. What's more important is the body of Christ, and that's unified with a head. So sometimes we need to look and see what's good for the whole body, not just what's good in our locality. So it got modified. It's not absolute. It's fungible. It can change. It can change. So what does that mean? It means that even to the local church is not that important. It can be modified. Sorry. Yeah. So, okay. Right. So ground of the church, I don't know. How would you know what the ground of the local church is if you read Witness Lee's ministry in the 90s? You'd have a hard time. Okay. How are you going to know what it is to exercise your spirit? All right. So this is a term that Watchman Nee talked about, that others have talked about, and it goes back to the Keswick Convention back in Europe in the early part of the 1900s. It's kind of an inner life type concept and practice. And honestly, if you read about exercising the Spirit and you hear what a Witness Lee person talks about, I'm exercising my spirit, they're talking about being loud. They're talking about releasing their spirit, which is what Watchman Nee has a book called The Release of the Spirit. Exercising the Spirit is more like, I notice that I committed an offense and I have to go make it right. That would be in line with exercising the Spirit. And that is not what a person in the local church means, unless they're very, very well educated. But if you ask the typical person what it is to exercise your spirit, is to call, "Oh Lord Jesus," 3 times and move your fist like this. That's exercising your spirit. No, it's not. Yeah. And then how are you going to know what are the 3 stages of salvation? So the 3 stages of salvation, you're like, what is that? Well, in the teaching of the local church, you have redemption. It starts with justification. It starts with redemption, the legal side of salvation. It doesn't actually start with being convicted. This is part of that. So it's you're saved, you're redeemed, you're justified, then you're sanctified, you're set apart, and your daily life, and you kind of grow in this sanctification where the meaner things kind of fall off, and you start growing into your Christian life through the adding of the Spirit into your being, this kind of practice of letting God in and letting God move and have way in your being. And then you eventually have God in your body, which is glorification. So your spirit is saved, your body is, your soul is sanctified, and your body is glorified. You're transformed and transfigured. So 3 stages of salvation. How would you know that? Well, you could just read Paul. You just read Paul, and interpret it that way. Okay. Yeah. How are you going to know that the 3 of the Trinity are distinct, but they are not separate? Okay. My brother, talking about the Trinity, what are you doing? The only way you know about the Trinity is you were taught the Trinity. And you were taught the Trinity from the people who initially formulated the Trinity, going back to the Nicene Council and then the next councils, to get the boundaries of what the Trinity is. It is not a naturally obtained teaching. You can believe the Trinity, you can be taught the Trinity, and then look back and see the Bible and interpret, oh, that's talking about the Trinity. But you can't read the Bible and pick up the Trinity. It doesn't come that direction. It comes through later understanding that developed in the Christian church around the 4th century to explain the different hard passages of the New Testament. Is Jesus God? Is he man? Is he subordinate to God? Is he equal to God? These types of things. Is he a creation? Is he the creator? What? Right? So these things became the teaching of the Trinity formulated in the 4th century. You don't learn the Trinity from Witness Lee. You learn applications of the Trinity from Witness Lee. Like, what does the Trinity mean to me in my experience? But if you just go to Witness Lee for learning the Trinity, you're going to be confused, which is okay. Because if you go back to the Church Fathers' teaching on the Trinity, unless you speak the exact formulation of the correct Greek words, you're going to be confused. And even if you get the exact formulation and you say it, you're not going to understand it. It's a mystery that cannot be understood by man. That's the explanation. No one understands the Trinity, and that's accepted in Orthodox Christianity, that you just have to accept it. You believe it, you confess it, but you don't understand it. You can repeat it. Yeah. So calling this out like Witness Lee is the one who teaches the truth of the Trinity, it's ridiculous. Everything that Witness Lee talks about the Trinity is meant to be on an experiential level. When he says, this sounds, what I just talked about may sound like it's a heresy, I don't mean the heresy. And then he'll quote the actual formulation from the creeds and say, this is what I believe. But experientially, this is what I experience. He goes back to the formulation to establish bona fides. And then he talks about experience. And I think that's fine. I don't know any other way to do it. I don't think you can do it another way. But anyone who comes up and says, you know what, the church fathers were off, right there, you've blown it, right? Now, you can also blow it, and you can also decide, I don't believe the formulation of the church fathers. Well, then you don't use the word Trinity. Then you drop that, right? So if you're really worried about the three of the Trinity and how they're distinct but not separate, you don't go to Witness Lee. You go back to the people who invented that. And if you don't agree with them, then you don't use it. It's really simple. If you say, no, I'm just going to go with the Bible, then just go with the Bible and just talk about what the Bible says. Don't use the word Trinity, but I have to. That's Orthodox. Okay, be Orthodox. This isn't that complicated. Okay, but here's the point. When you see this comment, he's making the point that without Witness Lee, you cannot understand any of these things. And all of these things are either in the Bible, in Christianity that are adopted, like the Trinity, or they are very subjective interpretations that benefit the ministry of Witness Lee specifically, and really no one else has them because no one else has them on purpose. Like, you could tell them these doctrines, like God's economy, and they'll look at that and say, yeah, no, that's not actually what the Greek is doing here. It's not opposing different teachings to God's economy. It's opposing questionings to God's economy, to God's administration. It's saying that if you teach bad things or things that are just going to lead to questionings, you get questionings. You don't get God's work on the earth among his people, which is a really clear thing. Instead of this, here's the lens to understand Adam and Eve through something called God's economy, and it has to do with this thing, right? Which you can do it. So let me back up. I'm okay, even if you admit, hey, we understand the Bible only through this lens of what we call God's economy, and then you define it, and then you say it has to do with God becoming man to make man God in life and nature, but not in the Godhead, to produce the body of Christ, to become the kingdom, to be consummated as the New Jerusalem. I'm okay with that. I don't think that's a problem. That's a teaching, and you can have teachings in your group. There's nothing wrong with that. It's this kind of attitude that you cannot understand the Bible without Witness Lee. Like, okay. Then you're just like the Catholic Church with the catechism and the official councils, creeds, and the Pope's encyclicals. All right, then just be that way. You're just like the Jehovah's Witnesses with Watchtower. Okay, be that way. Don't deny it, though. Just own it. That's the difference. All right. Here's another. Let's go down here. I got this. I've hidden some parts because it might indicate who the person is, and I don't want to do that. This is a very general reaction to from someone who has recently left the Lord's Recovery. As a matter of fact, I could have written this. I could have written this back in 2017 before I was going to step up and say something. You don't know who this is. It could have been me. I could be reading something that I wrote, except that it says Mr. Taylor, but there are other Mr. Taylors. This is a very common reaction from someone who has been in the local church and has left. I got this today. This person wrote this. I'm emailing you after discovering your YouTube account describing the church. Notice here, it doesn't say the local church because this person was in the local church with me and we just called it the church. That's it. It's the church. Not a church, not one of the churches. It's the church. Called the Lord's Recovery. I was heavily involved with them for several years and have only recently cut all contact. I created an alternate email account because I know the power and links they are willing to go to in order to harm or disparage those who leave them. This isn't even talking about speaking out against them. This is about leaving them. Now, I will say this to the person who wrote this. Don't worry too much. They're a lot less this way. Now, there are members who will hound you for years trying to get you back. But that is a personal problem. If you leave, most of the leadership are going to be okay with that. They're going to be okay. As a matter of fact, there are times where they will tell you, maybe you should leave. They're okay with that. It's not that draconian just by leaving. It doesn't mean that people you know in the churches don't want you back and they'll on their own be worried for your soul and go to get you. That's kind of harassment happens, but it's not from the official leadership. Nonetheless, I understand the concern. It's a real concern. All right, so this person has this experience. This person writes, I read Joanna's letter today, the one I was referring to, from the 35-year-old mother who got called all the nasty things, and found your page. I'm devastated. I know. I don't really have words for what I'm experiencing. I know. I'm not sure if this is an odd question to a stranger, but do you know if there are support groups for those who are exposed to this group? I do. I do know. There are several professionals who work with people that were in high demand, high control groups, including the Lord's Recovery. They may not advertise, kind of for the reason you put here, that, you know, the local church does have an official legal arm and they will tell people to shut up. So it may be kind of a little bit difficult to find, but you can find support groups for people that have left fundamentalism, evangelicalism. And if you're like, well, I'm an evangelical, I'm not leaving, then you're having a different experience. We're talking about abusive groups. And so there's people that minister to people who have been in high control groups. One example of why it's hard is some people will say, well, if the local church is so bad, why don't people just leave? Once you have cut yourself off and said, hey, everyone else's teaching is bad compared to Witness Lee, and everything else besides God's economy is a different teaching, I have to accept God's economy if I want to be in God's up-to-date move, then your society becomes the local church, and you become centered in your life, in your decisions in the local church. You marry into the local church. You have kids in the local church. You choose cities to live in because of the local church and being involved in the campus work there. Or you're going to go establish a church in another city, and so you volunteer to migrate to a city that you had no intention of going to, but you decide, I'm going to go spread God's church to this city, and you do it. And your whole life is involved in this church. You decide to go to college just so you can go to the full-time training. Then after the full-time training, you decide, what am I going to do with my life? Am I going to go to law school, maybe? Or am I going to, serve the Lord in the Lord's Recovery? Oh, you could do that. These decisions that are made affect your very life. And then later, in your 30s and your 40s and your 50s, to say, I'm going to leave. You've already cast aside all of your support groups. You've maybe alienated your non-church going family, and they're tired of hearing that you need to go to the training instead of Christmas. You can't come to Thanksgiving because there's a conference, one of the 7 feasts. You can't visit Memorial Day because there's the feast. 4th of July is out because there's a training at that time. Let's get together for, how about Chinese New Year? Nope, there's a conference then too. What can we do? Christmas is taken over. Thanksgiving is taken over. We've got Chinese New Year's taken over, 4th of July, Memorial Day, Labor Day. Let's do Labor Day. Nope, that's one of the 7 conferences, 7 feasts, 7 conferences you got to go to. You don't have any life outside of the local church if you're doing it correctly. Now, some people aren't, that dedicated. And so they will, instead of going to the training, they'll go to visit their family, which, it happens. It happens, but not among the special ones. The special ones never do that. The special ones get their family to join the local church, so they get together with their family at the 7 feasts. You see? It all works out. We're not against family. We just want everybody in the church. And then you can be with your family. It's great. Yeah. And it's not even necessarily taught this way. I don't think I ever heard someone say, don't go home, go to the training. But I did hear people say, the training's coming, see if you can go. Sign up now. It's great. Hey, here's what happens during the training. The trainings are really special. They're not easy to get into. You have to be approved. Also, the training, oh, what a blessing. I remember I went to the training. Before I went to the training, I had a problem with something. And after the training, that was miraculously taken away from me. I no longer had a problem with that thing, whatever it was. Usually something that you're having a problem with, that they know you're having a problem with, and they're just kind of, oh, by the way, I had a problem with that too until I went to the training. Then after the training, I didn't have a problem with that. So you get sold on going to the training and you decide on your own not to go home for Christmas because you want to get what they talked about. And if you think I don't know what I'm talking about, I know exactly what I'm talking about because that's what's happened to me. Although my family Christmas tradition was really strong, to the extent that I asked for permission to come to the training a day late because I wanted to travel through Texas and see my family on Christmas and then immediately make it back for the training, which meant I drove from Denton, Texas to San Antonio, arrived Christmas morning, had Christmas with my family and my mom's side, my grandparents on my mom's side, drove out to Del Rio, Texas, or actually the ranch at that time, but close to Del Rio, Texas, 200 miles away, to have Christmas afternoon with my grandparents on my dad's side, and then immediately booked it through Midland. I don't know why I went through Midland, but that was where I ended up going, all the way back to the Metroplex to end up back in Denton that night. So one day I traveled Texas so that I could go see my family and make it to the training. I had to get a permission for that. It wasn't like, oh, sure, not a problem. Or why don't you just enjoy your family and we'll catch you up later? No. It was like, I don't know. We really think you need to be here for the training. But I got a special permission to do that. And, thankfully I was young enough and I didn't wreck. And that was considered to be like, look at how, wonderful that is. That is really odd. It's really weird. But I was sold. I was believing everything they were saying, and I was jumping into it. So, why not? This kind of control is not always explicit. It can be just implied by the promises given to being faithful to the group. But there are times that they will explicitly do something. Like at one point, when I started meeting with the local church, I had a girlfriend. Actually, we went to college together. She was in Colorado, and I was down in San Antonio, and she had, moved. And we decided to go to the same university in Denton, about, halfway, and be together and get married after college. So we weren't playing games. We weren't being loose. We were celibate, and we both went to church. She had actually helped me become a Christian back in early high school, and an evangelical Christian, believing in the Lord, confessing, being born again, not just a Methodist Christian, but a born again Christian. So that was our thing, but there were these meetings that kept happening for the young people in the local church in Denton, where they would get together and they talk about dating and courtship and marriage, and how dating is of the flesh and leads to sin and is against God, very purity culture. But then there's courtship, which is a short period of time to express interest in someone and see if you're compatible, and then quickly to be followed up by getting married. All right. That's a thing. A lot of groups do that. And they kept teaching this, and I would listen, and I'm like, oh, that sounds really good. But I wasn't getting it, that they were upset that I was with a girlfriend and we would hold hands and sometimes kiss. But anyway, it was too much. It was, not appropriate. So I wasn't getting it, that this was talking about me. I'm just in these meetings and I'm like, oh, that sounds really good. I was accepting it. I believed what they were saying. I did not think it applied to me. The Spirit was not speaking to my heart. So after one meeting, I was invited over to someone's house, one of the shepherds. I had two main shepherds, and one of the families had invited me to come over after the meeting. And I loved these times. They were great. So I went over there, and they had some other guests as well, as including someone who was from out of town. And this became very important because the person from out of town, the local brothers introduced me. He said, oh, this is so-and-so. He's from out of town, and he wants to talk to you. I said, oh, okay. And all of a sudden, this out-of-town person began to rail on me and ask, he began to ask me questions like, oh, so you're new, and how long have you known the Lord, and how did you come to know the church? And, do you understand the church? Or, how do you feel about it? And I'm like, yeah, I'm a gung-ho. I'm like for it. I'm like, great. He says, great. You want to serve the Lord? He says, yeah. And he says, so why do you have a girlfriend? What are you doing? It's just the flesh. You're diluting yourself, diluting yourself, and maybe diluting too, but you're diluting yourself. You're giving into the flesh. The enemy is going to use this to separate you from God's purpose. You won't be an overcomer because you're going to be distracted by having a girlfriend. If this girl really is meant for you, and if you really are supposed to get married, then you can put it on the shelf and pick it back up after college and go ahead and get married. You don't have to maintain your relationship today. Why don't you trust God and put the relationship on the shelf today and then trust that God will bring you back in the future? I got the message. So the very next day, I called her and I said, I need to talk to you. And she came over to see me. We're right in the middle of campus. I would not meet with her in private at this point. And we're right in the middle of campus. And I said, would you marry me? She goes, well, yeah, we're going to get married. I said, no, would you marry me right now? I was 19. I had just turned 19 a few weeks before that. I didn't have a regular job. I didn't have a career. I didn't have any money. I was a kid. Wasn't ready to get married. But I knew either we had to get married or I had to break it up. So I asked her, would you marry me? She said, we're not ready. And she meant me. She was ready. I wasn't. I wasn't ready. But she was nice. And she said, we're not ready. And I said, I know you're right. I could not support you at this point. I know you're right. Therefore, I think we should put the relationship on the shelf and let God bring us back together after college. I just repeated what I was told. I repeated it. Why did I do that? Because I believed it. I was taught it and I believed it. That was a power move done on purpose to teach me a lesson. Now, right after that time, because I was in shock from this person being very blunt and telling me exactly what I needed to do, the local brothers came up afterwards and said, "Oh my gosh, wow, sometimes the people from out of town, they can be so rude. They can be so strong. Oh, so sorry. Are you okay? Do you need to pray? Let's go get some ice cream or something?" Good cop, bad cop. It's heavy psychological manipulation to a 19-year-old kid, which is probably evidence that I didn't need to be in a relationship at that time, but that's not the point. It was not said to me, maybe you shouldn't be in a relationship at this time. It was told to me, this is bad, this is going to happen, these are the bad things, you need to do this, get you in the corner, you can't get away, right? Oh my gosh. Is there support for people that go through something like this? Absolutely yes, there is. On Facebook, there's a group called Former Members of the Lord's Recovery. I belong to that group. It's a private group. You have to be vetted to get in. You can't just come in. Because of this problem that it took me a while to discover their true nature, and I think they must go to great lengths to remove things from the internet. Yeah, they do. Great lengths. Stories. So, yeah. Because of that, we have a policy. We don't just let anybody in. You have to answer the questions, and you need to be vetted. Does that mean that nobody ever gets in? No, because they're sneaky. They're that way. It's disgusting. It's very Christ-like not. It's really gross. But they're doing service to God, therefore they can kill you, right? I mean, that's the line, right? So anything goes, end justifies the means. But that's why the group is vetted. And that's a group there. And who's in that group? It's people who have left. Some people still hold to the teaching of the local church in everything except the control of the blended brothers and the overt control that they started exhibiting after Witness Lee passed away. Or they hold to things up to, say, the mid-'80s, and they don't take things after that, after the new way. Or they experience things in the 70s, and it was a lot more free, and they feel like that's the proper way. Or they've gone back to some other form of Christianity that they now believe in, or they don't have any form of Christianity anymore, and maybe they even don't profess to be a Christian any longer. The key is that they're former members of the Lord's Recovery. And why would all of these different kinds of people get together? Because they came from a central one place. They have an experience that no one else on earth does, and that is what it is to be inside the Lord's Recovery. It's a unique experience. You can say it's like Jehovah's Witnesses in some ways. You could say it's maybe like other Christian groups in some other ways. You could say that, but it's not. It has its own flavor, its own experiences. It has its own trauma. It has its own trauma. And as they say, only an addict can help an addict. Like you could be educated in the things of addiction, but unless you've experienced it, you don't understand it. I think that's the same. You could know about high control groups, high demand groups. You could have experienced a different one, but you're not going to really understand the local church. I remember I've availed myself of professional therapy, not specifically for this, but for other things. And I remember I was asked in one session about if I'd ever experienced trauma. And I began to talk about two things. One was my dad, and the other was the local church. And the therapist didn't get it. in either case. He just did not understand what I was talking about. So on my dad, he asked, do you ever suffer any trauma? And I said, well, what I remember is when I would tell my dad what my idea was for the future or what I should do or a decision that I wanted to make, and it was on the phone, this is what I would hear. And it shook me to my core every time. And the therapist is like, that's it? That's your trauma? I'm like, you do not understand. The level of disappointment in was stronger than any rebuke I had ever received. That level of disappointment was there. My dad and I, we got through that later before he passed away. That was all cleared up. But that was real to me. It wasn't real to my therapist. He didn't get it. He'd heard other stories and he had been trained in other things. That to him was nothing. And when it came to the church, I talked about, well, I was in this group called the local church. Like, oh, did they steal all your money? No. Did they beat you? No. Did they sexually abuse you? No. Well, then what's the trauma? He didn't get it. And to be fair, this is why I say I don't like to use the word cult, because it has different implications for different people. But I really like high demand, high control, because that is what they even say about themselves, that they are high demand. They do demand a lot. The church life is more than just going to church. The church life is your life. That's high demand. And high control is, I was controlled by the heavenly vision, Paul said. So we need to have the heavenly vision. Witness Lee says, I don't control people. The vision controls people. But the vision comes from Witness Lee, and it's about his ministry. It's Witness Lee. But the point is that there is this idea of being under this heavy hand called the heavenly vision. And you may say, that just sounds like Christianity. Okay. I don't know other people's experiences in their churches. Maybe they're experiencing the same thing with a different leader. I don't know. I'm only knowing what I experienced under the leadership I was under and what it was like. And that's who's in this group. So it is on Facebook. It is, you can search it and you might get in. It helps if you know somebody and you can establish that you are no longer meeting. If you don't answer the questions, you're not going to get in. If we reach out to contact you to find out more about you and you don't respond, you're probably not going to get in, right? Because we don't just want to open the door for some miscreant to come in and start trying to evangelize everybody or go back and report, hey, so-and-so is in that group and we need to, talk to their family. Whatever their great intention is, that's just going to cause hardship for themselves and others. We don't want that. We don't want that. But also in that group, there are some professionals who do minister directly to, or work with directly with people that were in the local church. And they are professionals. They do charge, but they have special rates. They're not trying to get rich. They're trying to make a living. I know we get very gun shy about money, but I don't do that. That's not what I do. If I was newly outside of that group, I would look for somebody who knew what was going on and who was trained beyond just trying to lead me into a different group. That's a problem. Jumping from one cult into another, it's so common. It's not even a joke. I was susceptible to join the group for a reason. So, I kind of have to face that. Like, what was it about me that led me to think this way? And I've noticed with tech, I joined a company back in the early 2000s that was proud of being fanatical. It was a company that their motto was fanatical support. And their employee of the year was given the Straight Jacket Award because of going above and beyond, of being so dedicated that they were fanatical. that they were beyond the pale, that they would do anything for the customer, right? It was a very strong culture in that organization. It was a business cult. So I loved it, man. I felt like I was right at home. And so I had to face that. Yeah. So what does that look like? It looks like I need a professional, is what it looked like. Am I in something like that today? No, I'm not. But it's because I did a lot of work. And I have connections with people who maintain a healthy respect for what we were in and what it means to not be in anymore. So, there's some public forums you can talk about the local church stuff. I don't find them that helpful to me, except sometimes there's documents that you can read on there, like local church discussions. They actually have a picture of me on the page. It has some good documents. I think the discussions, the ongoing discussions, are less helpful only because they're in public and people will interject and detract and distract. And, it just gets weird because there's people with a specific agenda. Actually, there's several angles of agendas happening all at once in the public sphere. And it's just like, oh my gosh, from people who used to be in that now want you in what they're doing today, to people who are in and want to discredit you or get you to doubt or, come back. It's like, oh my gosh, don't do it in public. Don't do it in public, right? Like, I do this here, but don't do it in public because it gets messy. There's a lot of agendas, a lot of things. There's Reddit too. It's funny. I've been a member of Reddit for a long time. I never thought about using it for the local church. But there's things there. But it is so weird. I mean, it is so obvious. There's people there with a specific agenda to hide anything negative about the local church and to go out there and just say, this is the best thing that's ever happened and everything's great and wonderful and lovely. And it's so transparently obvious. It gets very low engagement because if you're not in it, you're not buying it. I mean, that's the other thing. Getting out for a while and then coming back and reading and having the perspective of someone who's not in the group and looking at things like one of these, let's go back here, like this comment, it's so transparent to me that this is delusional. This is delusional thinking. So obvious. It's delusional. Or the behavior at the very beginning, this kind of, sneaking in and hiding and tricking and all that. Oh my gosh, it's so transparently gross. But at the time, I didn't see it that way. Oh, I have another document here. Oh, I found this. Let's talk about this for a second. This was very interesting. In the very beginning of what I talked about, in one of my other videos where I talked about my experience of being recruited, I mentioned rainbow booklets. Now, these don't look the same as the rainbow booklets I saw back in the 80s, so I guess they're a new cover. But they're called rainbow booklets because they're in different colors, usually pastels. The rainbow's not pastel, but anyway, you get the point. It's a rainbow booklet. They're multicolored. Beautiful. Rainbow is a great term. It appears in the Bible. It has to do with God's promise. Rainbows are amazing too. They're really beautiful. When you see a rainbow, it's always stunning. And I always stop and go, wow, look at the rainbow. I like rainbows. Rainbow is a good word. Look at this. This comes from a recent, I don't know how recent, but someone shared this with me, newsletter that Living Stream Ministry has. This came from the actual Living Stream Ministry. God's Oracle on the Earth writes, this article is on the nuggets and gems from the Bible booklets. The nuggets and gems from the Bible booklets in their content are what once were referred to as rainbow booklets. But because of the damage that the world has done to the word rainbow, we no longer feel good about using this term. What? Okay. So you're going to let the current political discourse determine your view on a term that comes directly from the Bible relating to God's promise to humanity. So you're going to let today's political climate cover that up. And you're going to say, we don't want to, appear woke or whatever. So we're not going to use this term. We no longer about using this term. Hello? This is one of the weakest things I've heard a Christian group say that says that they believe the Bible and they follow God's teaching. If you can't stick with the Bible in the face of the political climate and say, we're not letting you redefine the term, then what are you doing? You're just an extension of today's political climate. It's very weird. This isn't the group I knew in the 80s. The group I knew in the 80s stood against the world, stood against the age. It said, we are not of this age. We are not defined by this age. Watchman Nee said, science can prove that the Bible is not true with creation, but I will still believe the Bible. This was, standing against the tide. I'm not saying that's necessarily right, and I'm not saying it's not a real thing that people adapt their Christian views to match society. I mean, that's how slavery became not a Christian ideal, is that the Christians changed their viewpoint on slavery in the 1800s. I know this because I have documents from my own family's history talking about doctrines prior to the Civil War. And it's very clear that that was the prevailing attitude among Christians, was that slavery was God-given, God-ordained. Yeah, disgusting. And you say that, and you're like, that's not true. It was Christians that led us to be freed from slavery. Well, some Christians did, but they used modern thinking and then, looking at the Bible differently. I know that that happens. I'm not saying that we're not affected. But what I am saying is that this comment here, saying that we're so afraid of the word rainbow, we feel like we need to call it out and say we're not happy with it, is weak. Just stand up and say, you know what? We don't like homosexuality. We're against it. And we're taking back the word rainbow. Fine. I'm not saying to do that. I'm just saying this is weak. This is like, we are just a subset of today's evangelical political climate. And we feel bad that we're different. I mean, to me, this is the same thing as saying, praise God, we can now say Merry Christmas. And if you know the local church is against celebrating Christmas. The local church says Christmas is of Thyatira, the harlot, Jezebel, the Catholic Church, the corruption, the harlot. In Revelation, she's going to be judged by God. It's a bad thing to say Merry Christmas. We don't say Merry Christmas. We say Praise Jesus. We don't celebrate Christmas. We celebrate the resurrection. We celebrate the crucifixion. Every Lord's Day, we remember his death. There's no Christmas. You make an allowance for people who celebrate it, but it's pretty clear that if you're celebrating Christmas, you're in decline. To me, seeing this, where we no longer feel good about using this term, the next thing would be, praise God, we can say Christmas. It's just a political thing. You've just become a subset of the culture. You're no longer interesting, standing apart, unique. Does this mean you're now adapting and you're becoming part of regular society? I don't think so, but that's how this reads. This term had not been so tainted. I'm telling you, if you're, some people use it to express a different idea. Are you controlled by the Spirit? Are you of sober mind? This is really, really weak. And this is from the Oracle, the one publisher, the one publishing, meaning that, this is God's up to. You see what I'm getting at? In other words, this is their choice. They can make this choice. They can decide that that's how they want to treat the world, see the world. But in claiming then that they speak for God, I mean, they're just another group that claims to speak for God. They're not that special. So maybe don't give them much more credence than you would any other group that says they speak for God. Just like find the good stuff that you find that resonates with you and keep it. And the stuff that doesn't resonate with you, drop it. Pretty simple. Not allowed in the local church. You got to accept it all. No picking and choosing because of, God's economy and not teaching different things, their view. You got to accept the whole thing or you're in decline. Don't feel good about using this term. It's weak. Anyway, this has been long. Let me see. Oh, I've got some comments. Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah. Oh, I think you should go deeper into exercising your spirit. They still think it's being loud and moving hands and stuff. Oh, I know. Oh, Lord Jesus. I know. So the point of the difference with exercising the spirit is actually in their own literature. It's in, Watchman Nee talks about it. So, and you can just get into it. And if you think about it at any depth, being loud is not some kind of virtue. It's not some kind of holy thing. It's just being loud. Being quiet is not a bad thing. It's just being quiet. This whole idea of exercising your spirit is being in touch with the indwelling Spirit of God and expressing Himself through you, touching your human spirit to have contact with God. It's a very inner life thing. It's very mystical. It's a union thing. You could be reading something by one of the inner life teachers and understand exercising the spirit at a very deep level. But when you go to the meetings of the local church, they say, okay, we're going to have a time for sharing and be sure to exercise your spirit. And they don't mean confess your sins, consider your ways. They mean speak boldly and loudly. And usually I'm using my left, but usually, with your fist. It's a thing. I remember Don Looper making fun of this in the 90s. He was one of the main teachers back in the church in Austin and in the Texas region. He was very charismatic, influential. He would make fun of us. Oh, Lord Jesus. He says, it's always the right fist. It's never the left. And I remember I went, amen. And he goes, you did that with your left, didn't you? And it was very funny. But he was quite something. And he could say these kinds of things because it was true. Why did this occur? How did this become such a thing? Well, it's because you're in an insulated group and you pick up each other's ways. It's actually very natural to do that. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just a thing. It's a thing that is. It's not the move of God. It's the effect of being in an insular social group. Admit that. Otherwise, you get confused. It's like, wait, well, is this of God or is it of me? Is it of the group? It's just a cultural thing. And that's actually what Don Looper was talking about when he started saying, we need to not go to the college campus and do the raising of the fist and the shouting of, oh, Lord Jesus, across the campus. We need to not carry the recovery version. We need to just appear like normal Christians because He was pointing out that we did not appear like normal Christians. And normal Christians would see us and go, what is that? Because we were so odd. We were so odd. This is how odd we were. If you met someone from Austin in the 90s, say you were in Anaheim, California, and you walked up to somebody and they began to talk to you and they started to do this. Well, brother, I really think that we need to consider the Lord's way. And you know that they're from Austin because that's what Don Looper did. He had something with his throat where every once in a while he would do this little clearing of the throat. And he would always take his glasses and kind of move them like this. Now, at the time, I didn't need readers, so I didn't have glasses. But other people like me who didn't have glasses would do this when they would talk. They would, without having glasses, they would make the move of Don Looper. Why? No one taught that. It's just got picked up. You're looking up to this person. He is bigger than life. You're emulating him. You take his way, and his way is to do this when he talks and clear his throat. So you clear your throat and you do this. It happens. It just happens. But to say, oh, this is all God's move, God's way, this is not a social thing, it's not psychological, it's not human, that is just deception. You begin to dress the same way. You know who else dresses the same way? Every other group with a strong central leader. They all dress the same way. Did you see Congress? Whenever they go up with the president, they dress just like him. Why? Is that a requirement? No. They're emulating the person that they follow. Very strong, charismatic leader. It's very common to do that, especially if there's repercussions if you're not in favor with that strong leader. But, that also applies to the local church. Don't get on their bad side, right? Don't oppose Benson. May he rest in peace. Yeah. Anyway, this has been a lot of fun. Oh, Priestly Scribe writes, to show our faithfulness to the recovery, consider ourselves married to the recovery. We need to get ourselves married to the Lord's recovery. Yeah. I mean, why not? 100%. Echo chamber, absolutely. Oh, this person writes, as someone escaping the 2010s era, I will say I don't pick up people's way. I learned I was neurotypical, so I'm insular against the insular. Reminds me of Zelensky without a suit. I don't know what that means. But I will say this. Everyone has their experience, and we have a kind of a shared experience of what we were in. And then we have a reaction to it. And we do notice things that we see in society that remind us of things. And there was a Netflix thing on a show called, it was about the group that started the presidential prayer breakfast on Capitol Hill, a very secretive group. And I can't remember the name of the group, but the Netflix special reminded me of what the local church was trying to be. They didn't make it. They weren't as successful as that, but they were trying to be something that could influence society. I mean, they've got very powerful people amongst them, not so much in the United States, but from Asia, especially, where they've been around longer. There are people in various countries in Asia that are extremely powerful that are associated with the group, and it offers a lot of benefits to the group, and maybe to them, but mainly to the group. And I don't think there's anything necessarily nefarious. I think it's just that powerful people who are believers in the group and adopt the way of the group will use their power to benefit the group, just like I would if I had power and I was beholden to the group. I mean, I remember the first time I came across a large sum of money, I was very happy to tithe right away. First thing I did with that large amount of money. Why? Not because someone told me I had to, but because I believed in the group. So that's why you do things. Yeah. So anyway, there are people that will come out and say that, they disagree with some of the teachings. I'm not saying I agree or disagree with the teachings. I think that everyone has to be persuaded in their own mind. Everyone has to everyone has to give a defense for what they believe. And I think that's between them and their conscience, them and God. And I'm not here to say a belief in and of itself is right or wrong. Mainly, I care about what the effect of those beliefs might be. So, for example, I think one could say, yes, the Bible teaches slavery, because it does, and just say, this is a reflection of human society at that time, and this does not represent the ideal. Society changes, and we change along with it. But the core of the Bible is blah, 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 blah. I think that's an acceptable thing to say, to admit that's what the Bible teaches, but then to say, I don't have to follow that. That's not essential. And if you want to do that by claiming the lens of God's economy, that's fine. You don't have to. You could claim the lens of progressive revelation. You could claim the lens of the Bible gives us a vocabulary to talk about our deep spiritual experiences. You could say that. I'm not here to say one way is better than the other. I just would like people to be honest about it. So we go back to those three things. Being honest about the actual demands and restrictions and that you have. Being honest about who you are, not hiding it, especially not among college students that are away from their family in a vulnerable position, befriending them and intentionally gaining their trust so you can lead them to the church without them knowing that's where they're going. I don't think that's right. And then using the podium of the Lord's Recovery to smear individuals who raise up questions, doubts, concerns, and even say things that oppose. To use your bully pulpit to be a bully is spiritual abuse. Those are the three concerns I have. Of course, there's also the concern over the existence of a team that investigates people's backgrounds. Why not just trust God? Why not just be wronged? Didn't Paul say something about that? We're trying to protect people from getting swindled. Okay. But you look just like Scientology, but just not as good. That's the thing. A lot about the Lord's Recovery. It's like Jehovah's Witnesses, just not as good. They've got their own publishing company. It's been around longer. It's a larger organization. They are more honest about what they do allow and don't. They don't have to hide it, So they're like that, but not as successful. The DCP is like Scientology, just, not as good. It's just not as good as Scientology. Scientology is a lot better. They're able to control things so much better. Just kind of, yeah. And maybe that's because deep down, it's not right. Some of that stuff, some of the history, celebrating the death of one of the internet opposers, and that his end was ignominious, as if there's a death that isn't, disgusting, but celebrating the disgustingness of Jim Moran's death. And just being like, yeah, this is how it happened. He was found like this, and oh my gosh. And then celebrating being able to obtain the assets of the Jim Moran from his family and then take it off the internet. Celebrating that. Why? You don't think God can overcome that? Or contacting me to get me with my tech contacts to get Google to remove an image of a book regarding Witness Lee off the internet, saying that you think someone at Google had put that in the Google search results on purpose to besmirch the reputation of Living Stream Ministries. Like, what are you talking about? No one cares that much, especially not at Google. They don't care. Even to have called me and asked me to work my back channels with Google, which, I mean, I know I'm in tech, I'm in the Bay Area, but I'm like, I could call people and they're going to say I'm crazy. No one cares. No one's doing that. They don't have time to do that. But that's what's going on because everything revolves around the little group. That's odd. That's weird. I get it. It's just odd and it's weird. Anyway, I hope this was fun for you. Recommended replacement churches. Yeah, I don't know. It's hard. There's different directions. So let me just mention. So when I left in 2017, I was at a very low point in my life. I talk about. I have a 2-hour video that's actually edited, not like this. That I talk about my story and I go into where my life was in 2017, and alcoholism and divorce, just a terrible situation. And at the heart of all of it was dealing with my relationship with the Lord's recovery and everything. Which, by the way, one of the reasons I did that 2-hour-long video where I talked about the bad stuff in my life is because someone had contacted me and said that they were going to bring up the bad stuff in my life if I didn't stop my videos. So I said, oh, well, let's just talk about all the bad stuff in my life. Oops, it's out. I talked about it. Sorry. And I didn't talk about it until my kids were done with the church. I didn't want them to have any repercussions, And my ex is still in the church, but she's her own person. I don't have any influence over her. And, I don't think I could if I wanted to dissuade her. She's very solid, not going to change. And she's made her choices. And she's, that's fine. So if you take it out on her, we're divorced. She has nothing to do with this. So, yeah, I don't know what to tell you. But what's really funny is all those dark things that they were wanting to bring up are all stuff that happened when I was faithful under the ministry of Witness Lee. Faithful. I was struggling mightily. I could not get a grip on how to live life, but I was faithful. And it wasn't until I gave it all up that, oh my gosh, my life became very boring and very normal and not odd. As odd as I get, a very spring-like flamboyant shirt. I think I like these kinds of shirts because they're not white like I had to wear in the full-time training. I think I like the colorful shirts because of that. But it is one of the things that I'm known for at work when I go on a call, just like this, with my higher ups. I'll always have a fancy shirt of some kind just to stand out. It's a gimmick. That's about as weird as my life gets. It's not, it's no stories of drinking and debauchery. I don't have to do that anymore. I made peace. You know, couldn't do it in the church. Couldn't figure that out. The only other active alcoholic I had met I met two, but one of them, the one that had the most progress away from alcoholism, he said that his trick was to give himself more to the church. And he just, instead of drinking, he would read life study messages. So anytime he wanted to drink, he'd read a life study message, which sounds like that's not bad, but actually it's just switching up your drinks. That's not dealing with the problem. Yeah. Anyway. So if you're offended by anything I said, I'm offensive. I'm not trying to offend. If you thought I wasn't enough, let's talk about it. I would love to actually have a session where I'm talking to others as well, and not so much about my story or my views, because my views aren't the only views. They're not necessarily right. So I'm hoping to have someone join me in the near future and discuss their perspective and their experience. I think I would learn a lot from that. But for now, how long has this been? 2 hours and 26 minutes. Not bad. All right. Thank you so much. And for the people that joined, chatted, I do appreciate that. That was a lot of fun. I'll be back. That's all for now.